First of all, it's an honor to be here, and I'm grateful of having an opportunity to share my views on these nuclear archives. And before I start these slides, maybe I try to put it into context. What does these archives really mean to us? And I always describe nuclear weapon as a system. System like a tent with 3 poles. One pole is the fissile material which you produce for the nuclear weapon, the one which makes the nuclear explosion. So that's one pole. And much of the effort when we now do the verification under JCPOA actually goes to that pole. But there are 2 other poles to keep the tent up. One is the nuclear device itself, the nuclear explosive package which has the fissile material, conventional explosives, high explosives, electronics, which makes it to nuclear detonation. And the third important part is the pole is the delivery vehicle, which in this case is a missile. So in order to block countries' road to nuclear weapon, you need to handle actually all 3 poles. You cannot put your eggs only to half of one of the poles, which might be a little bit the case now. That's one thing. The second thing is that I work in the IAEA. IAEA is a technical organization. It doesn't measure intentions of the people. Its job is just to provide the facts for the policymaking organs, which in the case of IAEA are the Board of Governors and the General Conference. So one of my old friends put it that way, that the IAEA is a technical organization which serves for political purpose. That's what it is in essence. So then, where does this archives fit there? Well, they tell actually something on all those 3 poles. But then we have to keep in our mind what they are and what they are not. First of all, this is a snapshot where the Iranian nuclear weapons program was in 2003 when an order came to stop the work. And where they were heading at that point of time, they had a very ambitious plan, according to this documentation, to produce 4 nuclear devices by end of 2004. And to have 1 nuclear device made for underground nuclear test and prepare a place where the test to be conducted. And they had built, and I saw soon the facilities and more on the findings. So we got this opportunity last year from the Israeli government to come with David Albright here and to see their documentation which the Israeli intelligence picked during that night. When I look at the documentation itself, you have seen 50,000 pages, 50,000 files, more than 100 DVDs. It's a huge amount of information which got extracted. But it's only 20% what the people believed were on that warehouse. So there is another 80% which stayed behind, because this was already something like 500 kilograms of weight. So you cannot during one night pick so much. But on the other hand, when I look at it, and you see from the skis, it's a good representative sample from what was going in that project in Iran. I said that they were making nuclear weapon based on the fissile material which is high-end, it's uranium. At the same time, Iran was also working with plutonium. On those documents which we have seen, there's nothing about plutonium. So this means that there are some other nuclear weapons related activities which probably were running a little bit behind, because maybe they saw that uranium is at that stage the way to go. But there are also a lot of other stuff which we still need to understand. And what is most important in this case is to understand how did they come to this situation which was in the year 2003, because they had to do a lot of decisions somewhere end of 1990s in setting up the program, setting up that project, which I talk soon, and how to deal with the other parts of the preparations, research and development, building the industrial infrastructure. None of that is there in this documentation, but those had to be in place. But then we have to look also what happened after 2004, when the project was stopped. One of the memos which the IAEA saw in 2005, when we got first time some samples of this, was that there was actually instruction for these researchers: stop the program, document everything which you have done, and finish the experiments which you had going on. Then the question is certainly what has happened since then? Because the documentation also shows, particularly from the archives, that some work continued. But this work is dual use in nature, which cannot be necessarily tied directly to nuclear weapons development. So now one of the important questions for the IAEA is certainly to find out what they have been doing since these people, institutes, where other equipment and things related to the program after 2004 until today. And I think that they are also a matter of concern. But they give us this archives gives us a baseline to start with. So we have written with David Albright about 10 memos from different parts of this program, starting from the overall plan, what was the program in 2010, to the very recent one, which talks those parts of the nuclear weapon design which are to do with high explosives, how you initiate nuclear reactions, etc. So those are all in public. They are on the website of FDD and they are on the website of ISIS in Washington, D.C. Are we going to dive deeper to see information? We have to think about it, because after all we are small institutes with limited resources, so this should be taken by someone else, and particularly IAEA, which has not briefed the member states to that details which we have here. They have a briefing today actually in Vienna, but I don't think that they will mention anything over to this detail, because I saw the report which they have written a week ago, and there's no one word about the work which they have done with the nuclear archives.
The language is Farsi the entire?
No, actually, yeah, that's a good question. Certainly most of the documentation is in Farsi, that's for sure. But they are engineering documents. There are engineering drawings, layouts, and very often when you work, let's say, with the uranium, if you listen Mr. Salehi talking on TV in Farsi, when it comes to uranium hexafluoride, he says uranium hexa. So he doesn't use Farsi word. And this is the experience which we also had in Iraq in early 1990s. That you can actually find a lot from this documentation, just looking at the terminology, drawings, and you have an understanding already from year 2005 and before what was there. So you can start to act with some of the documents at a very early stage, like we did in 2005 when we got the first documents. 1 month later we had a first meeting with Mr. Larizani. But then when we look at it in a broader context and from the role of the IAEA and other organizations, actually there are 3 agreements, legally binding agreements which Iran has made. One is certainly the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement and Additional Protocol. Are they in compliance with the provisions of those? Then is the Security Council Resolution 2231 and the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is kind of part of it. And then is the NPT, the basic undertaking under Article 2 of the NPT, which says that the country should not seek for nuclear weapons. While you have this kind of documentation, which you see, they probably have not been in compliance with that. And by possessing those documents today, I think that one can also argue that this is not in a conformity with the provisions of the NPT. But the IAEA is not the secretary of the NPT. This is for other parties to judge. But if we take now then a broader look, reading all those documents which we had an access, certainly we didn't go to the most sensitive parts of nuclear weapon design. It's not, we don't have a proper clearances, it's none of our job, and even less job to write in detail in public and distribute such information. But if we look against the IAEA assessment in December 2015, when IAEA submitted a report on the so-called possible military dimension, which was a prerequisite for the implementation of the JCPOA to proceed, which then took in January. The IAEA concluded that Iran conducted feasibility and scientific studies to acquire technical competencies and capabilities. That's what the IAEA report says. But when you look at this documentation, the plan was much more ambitious. It was actually to manufacture during that period of time those 5 nuclear weapons and be prepared to test one if needed underground. Then you go to the more technical part of it. There was a cohesive plan to manufacture nuclear weapons. They were already constructing facilities where you may work with the fissile components, with the high explosive components. You do some tests to make sure that they work. And then when this was stopped, IAEA was not provided the full history as was promised in October 2003 by Iranian government in the letter which you will see in the IAEA November report from that year, the full history what had taken place. And then how Iran did it is actually that, and I show it soon, they had basically two programs. They had a civilian nuclear program, and then they had behind there a parallel program which was dedicated for nuclear weapon development and manufacturing. And in between there was this industrial infrastructure and R&D which actually served both. And when you do it this way, it's very difficult to find that military program there behind and associate if they, let's say, someone tests with and builds centrifuges, that actually those centrifuges don't go to Natanz, they go somewhere else. And some other countries have done the same. So it's not a unique way, but this is one way to conceal. And here I have put how I have read the archives using the information which is there, facilities which are there. And the black part is the nuclear weapon part of the program, and the blue part is the one which they present today and presented to great extent that time as the civilian nuclear program. And we cannot go all details. You will have a copy of this, I think, at the organizers will give you. There's an electronic copy, so you can have it. But let's go quickly through. On the left top corner, uranium mining and milling. Actually, this Kachin mine, which was in Bandar Abbas and which was presented to the IAEA, was actually run in the beginning by Revolutionary Guards. So they made the contracts, the people worked for them, and then when this thing became public in 2003, they changed the documentation in such a way that when it was presented to the IAEA, it was actually civilian program. We had some doubts to that end if you go to those reports from 2003 and 2004, but there was no hard evidence to go against it. So we accepted then the Kachin mine at that point of time. And when you look at it from a technical point of view, actually most likely it's not a commercial enterprise because it produces 20 tons of yellow cake per year. If you are looking to supply fuel for Bushehr power plant, you need 200 tons of such material per year. So this is only 10% of that. So this probably had some other thinking behind. Then once it comes as a yellow cake out of the milling plant, it goes to conversion facility where uranium hexafluoride is produced, which is then fed to enrichment plant. From this documentation, we don't find where this conversion was done. There are some sporadic documents pointing to what we called Green Salt project already in 2005, but this is one of those unknowns which still need to be found out if there is a small uranium hexafluoride production or has been in Iran. But that step had to be somewhere. When you look at the time schedule, Isfahan commercial facility was likely not the place for a number of reasons. IAEA inspectors would have picked it, so they would have asked why there's a yellow cake coming in and going somewhere as a uranium hexafluoride, which we don't know. So this is practically out of question. Then it went to uranium enrichment plant. Actually, this is the Fordo. When this underground facility, which was revealed in 2009, was and came public, again, Iran changed the documentation and tried to prove to the IAEA that this was a civilian program and civilian facility which was just under construction. But this documentation showed, first of all, it was designed originally for high-enriched uranium, not for low-enriched uranium, which is normally for a power plant. It had a different name, etc. So there are several things which Iran failed to tell to the IAEA at that point of time. Then from that facility, then you take the hexafluoride, you turn it to uranium metal and manufacture uranium metal components. The first link, we don't know where it is. It could be actually part of the next facility there, which is in Parchin. This facility was under construction in 2003, 2004. There is a lot of imagery there, photos, etc. They are on those reports which I referred to. And we have been able to confirm independently by satellite imagery some of those, that those are not fakes, that you really see also those things even today, some of them there. So this they failed to tell to the IAEA, and now it's important for the IAEA to go there and see what's the status of that, what happened with the equipment, where there are some experiments which were done before and were not declared to the IAEA as is required under the safeguards agreement. And then you manufacture the nuclear weapon components, fissile components itself, it's the same place. But to get there, you need to do a bunch of experiments to validate the design, complete your configuration. And Parchin, which you have followed in several last few years, was one of the places where those tests were. When IAEA went there in 2015, Iran said that basically those installations there were used for chemical storage, certain chemicals. When you read the IAEA report, actually it doesn't talk very much about it, but there's a footnote which tells that actually IAEA didn't agree with Iran's explanation for that facility. So there's a lot of photographic evidence, experiments, equipment, designs related to those experiments which they conducted. And most likely they also included smaller amounts of uranium for the initiator, which should be subject to the IAEA safeguards. So there probably has been violation and is still likely a violation because that material has to be somewhere. And then that uranium down there you see is the manufacturing of neutron initiator. That installation, we don't know where it was. It could have been actually one of those buildings in Parchin, but it is vital for the nuclear weapon design because this is actually which triggers the nuclear explosion. So you have a kind of soccer ball, which outer part is high explosive. In the middle you have a high-end uranium, and in the very middle of that is the neutron initiator. I mean, this whole thing is compressed. It's like a spark plug which initiates the actual nuclear chain reaction. So it's a vital part of the design. And it's vital also in that sense that is this Iranian development or did they get the foreign help to do it? And that will tell a lot about the design. If you go to the IAEA reports, we already talked on those high explosive tests that there was a foreign person working. This documentation brings it more thoroughly. So what needs to be now done by the IAEA is okay, I passed this. I mentioned those where they are in violence or not violence. So, first of all, I said they are not, whatever comes from those documents, they are not compatible with Iran's statements on the peaceful nature of the program. IAEA has been deceived as late as 2015 when this PMD file was discussed. But what is most worrisome here is that Iran has retained these documents on the nuclear weapons and processes, equipment, and is thus in breach on the obligations. But the question is why to keep it if your program is peaceful? And then I didn't talk very much about the Shahab-3 missile at this point of time, but one has to understand what they have been doing, how far they went with this missile delivery system, and whether they have also worked with the cruise missiles more recently, which are entirely out of the scope of Security Council Resolution 2231. Someone will say that, oh, cruise missiles, that they are much more sophisticated, etc. But actually they have used as a model the old Russian cruise missile, which was nuclear capable, called KH-55. And these are the recent experiments. And these missiles start to fly now up to 2,000 kilometers. So I think that they are a threat in the Middle Eastern area if they are able to make them nuclear, able to deliver nuclear weapons. And those who know more about the defense systems for missiles, actually they are much more difficult to defend against the cruise missiles than to ballistic missiles. So this is something really to think for the future. And here I list more technically where Iran is, in my view, in non-compliance or in breach obligations, both Safeguards Agreement, Additional Protocol, then Section T of the Article 82 of Section T of the JCPOA. It lists quite a few things which Iran should not do, and things which are related to nuclear weapon development. It has also a lot of equipment, fast-acting cameras, certain neutron measurement systems, flash X-rays, things like that. And if Iran uses them for non-nuclear purposes, it has to apply to the Joint Commission of the JCPOA. We don't know whether they have applied or not, because the Joint Commission doesn't have any public reports. But my hunch is that most likely not. And then why they have retained those documents, and they go both to the provisions of NPT and JCPOA. But Iran is developing further. This is one thing which in the JCPOA they are making better centrifuges, they are looking additional enrichment places, they are opening additional mines. These are all from the statements of Salehi and announcements of Iranian government. So this is what we will see there 5 years from now in terms of the nuclear infrastructure. This is all on the civilian part, but the technical part is there as well. And let's take just as two examples. Heavy water reactor. Under the JCPOA, the Arak heavy water or Condap heavy water reactor design is going to be changed in such a way that it produces less plutonium. That's fine. But at the same time, Iran has kept all the infrastructure to make another Arak. And most of that is not subject to any monitoring by the IAEA. And this just lists the places where those key components are done. So just by eliminating that Calandria from Arak, you really don't solve the problem with the longer term, if they want to build another reactor. But perhaps more worrisome is the uranium enrichment, because centrifuge, which is the basic device to enrich uranium here, it has about 100 components. Only 2 of them are actually monitored by the IAEA under the JCPOA. Other 92 are outside of additional protocol, outside of the monitoring. So what you can do if you want to ramp up quickly, you manufacture all those 92, and then you finish those 2 in a crash course. But on top of that, a year ago, Iran inaugurated an assembly plant for IR6 centrifuge in Natanz. So actually you can even make the rest of the infrastructure, like where you manufacture the centrifuges, not only the components, but that factory ready to go if you decide, which then cuts dramatically the breakout time if you want to do so. And then meanwhile, only those certain things are monitored. And meanwhile, and I think that this is a truthful statement by Mr. Zarayan, actually they have practically become independent in manufacturing centrifuge components and parts, which means that the export controls play lesser role than what they played, let's say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, because everything can be done domestically. So everything then, in terms of the verification, depends on the capabilities of the IAEA and information provided by the intelligence. Then I quote here from the January, the US intelligence threat assessment, how they see the Iranian program developing. After having an access to these archives, they say Iran is not currently undertaking key nuclear weapons development activities we judge necessary to produce nuclear device. And then says about this threatening which Iran has done, but they don't give any timeline how long it will take. Well, this has to be read carefully, because first thing is the definition. What do you mean with the key nuclear weapon development activities? They don't define in this public document what they mean with that. And how they judge what is necessary and not necessary, because some of that may be already ready, so you don't need to develop. It's on the shelf, you take. And then they raise some of the concerns on the ballistic missiles, but I think it would be appropriate to talk also about the cruise missiles. And then when I go to this, and I read it myself, not currently undertaking key nuclear weapons development activities. Well, they are improving uranium enrichment, making more advanced centrifuges. Now the IAEA report says that actually they have installed this IR6 and more than 20, now there are more than 30. They have been testing them. There is no economical or technical reason for Iran to produce enriched uranium with these centrifuges. There's a well-functioning world market, and Russians have provided a long-term delivery agreement. Then there are these threats to produce uranium at higher levels of enrichment. In the past, Zarif and Rouhani very often said that we go to 20%, but now the leader said a couple of weeks ago that we may even go beyond that. Those 20% and beyond had to be taken seriously, because once you have done 20% enrichment, and if you plan to produce weapons-grade uranium, actually you have done 90% of your work. This is the way this enrichment plays out. So it's not the glass, where you have 1/5 of the liquid. It's not the glass full. It's a glass where someone has just taken a sip, because you have this 10% left. And then occasionally there come these threats that actually we can really do the nuclear weapon if it comes to that. And also recently Zarif tossing with the idea that they might even leave NPT if they don't get the benefits. And then is the work with the missiles. And now we come to the monitoring. The ballistic missiles and the whole missile issue, which is part of the nuclear weapon system, it's actually not really monitored by anyone, to be frank. There's a UN Security Council resolution which proscribes Iran doing certain activities, including testing and development of ballistic missile designed to be capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Designed to be capable. How you measure that when you see them testing? There's no actual monitoring. And then we keep in our mind that they were working with Shahab 3 missiles, and then the missiles which they have used as a model, the North Korean or which actually are old Russian, they all were in the Soviet Union nuclear capable. So that is a very hazy and narrow line, what is designed not or not. And that should be monitored in a very different way. And then when people look, when you do this kind of agreement and you look the data, you have to also to look from the technical point of view, where you are now, that's easy part, but where you think that the capabilities are 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and 15 years from now, and how would they use those capabilities at that point of time. And I think that this is the biggest challenge for those people who are negotiating the agreement. So what ought to be done? First of all, the IAEA should go to visit these places. Had it been the old practice, like what we had in 2002 when Natanz came, the IAEA would have written a letter to Iranian government and asked a clarification. What are these archives? What's the purpose of them? Could you clarify what they are there? We would like to come to see them if you invite us. It might be in your interest. That's what we did with Natanz. And it might be also advisable at this point of time freeze that remaining documentation, put under our IAEA seal until investigations are over and understanding about the purpose and scope of those documents has been established, and then perhaps destroy them, remove them, like it was the case from Iraq, South Africa. IAEA had to destroy documents still in South Africa. They were not all destroyed by them, or Libya, and even Switzerland, which may take you as a surprise. Because you remember there was this black market network, and they had quite a lot of nuclear weapons related documentation, some couple of hundred detailed drawings how you make a nuclear device. So Swiss government asked the IAEA assistance to identify those documents, and then they were destroyed under our observation. And then I think that for the member states it would be important also to get a better reporting when this sort of things come, that what the IAEA has done, because it improves not only the transparency and credibility of the IAEA, but perhaps has an impact on the concerns of the neighboring states, that they see certain progress, and if the progress gets stuck, they can intervene. And I also feel that the Joint Commission should be more transparent. And as I said, all these documents should be removed, destroyed, and equipment either do same thing or render them harmless. And then we wrote a kind of menu with David Albright a couple of weeks ago, what to do, how to do this. I'm ready for your questions. Thanks for your attention.
Dr. Heinonen, Israel had, for many years, taken a lead role in from an intelligence standpoint, in criticizing and exposing the Iranian nuclear file and production. To what degree do you support Israel's position on the JCPOA, its professional criticisms of the JCPOA, and what, in your view, are the major difficulty problematics of the JCPOA versus its effectiveness from your point of view, where you sit?
First of all, I think that from the IAEA at the time when I was there, the support given by Israel was very valuable, but there were many other states as well. And we deal very different. We don't take it as a face value, if I may say so. So, you need to always to corroborate it. Look what other information you have and fit it there. And sometimes I know the people here in the intelligence were a little bit disappointed when we didn't act swiftly. But this is the way, how the verification process is. It's been valuable, I say, and particularly now this one, because now we get the baseline for that where they were in 2003 with the nuclear weapon development part. Because this is one of the deficiencies on the JCPOA, that actually there was no obligation for Iran to give a full final declaration. It was crafted in a very different way. Ambassador Gold remembers one of the 687 resolution was full, final, complete declaration by Iraq on its nuclear program, chemical weapons and missiles. We don't have such kind of thing in JCPOA. And when I asked from some of the negotiators, they told me that, look, we know that Iran is not going to be good in making declarations. And our intelligence know everything. So therefore, we felt that it's not necessary. And this is in writing, so it's not only that someone talks with me. So I think that this was one thing that we really didn't start from the kind of clean baseline JCPOA. We had something that in the EU3 agreement in October 2003, but unfortunately missed here. And then the second thing is that basically the missiles practically left out and the weaponization itself, and we are concentrating most of the verification on declared sites. But already on this scheme, you see that there were actually quite a lot of undeclared sites. So even that part which we monitor, there are some deficiencies, and particularly access to the military sites, because most of them were in the military sites. So I think that when we make the JCPOA 2, one day missiles should be in, cruise missiles in, full declaration. And then maybe the access rights should be different. There's one paragraph which in one way is good in JCPOA, in one way it is not. And this is the complementary access by the IAEA to undeclared site. It was a compromise when additional protocol was negotiated in 1990s. So when you went to undeclared site, actually there's no timeline how you get in. It's a negotiating process without timeline. So JCPOA has actually now 1 month time for Iran to respond. If they don't respond, then there is an arbitration process and the problem gets elevated. But there's one flaw. IAEA has to show the evidence why it wants to go to that site, and which then puts IAEA to a very awkward position. First of all, Iran can say, oh, this is not enough in terms of data you give me more. So in reality, you expose everything in order to get there. And then if they want to do countermeasures, deceive you, they will be in much better position because they get the picture. So you can design your explanation. And we saw a lot of that happening in 2003, 2004. And Iran is not the only country which has done that. So I think that some of those measures need to be also revisited. And then the last thing is that there is also a dispute between some of the P5 and among P5 that what should be the IAEA role in this verification work, which is directly associated with nuclear weapons. For example, Russian Federation, in its opinion, this is not an IAEA job. IAEA is concentrating on nuclear material. Yeah, that is if you look the NPT, and do certain interpretation. But I raise a very simple question, which I had told my Russian colleagues several times in Vienna, Moscow, is that, well, if that was the case, why did you join us in Iraq? Why did you join us in South Africa? Why did you join us in Libya? Because you felt that it's not our job. So there's some feedback. Yeah?
Following this, if I may, with all these discrepancies in the JCPOA, do you think that now with Iran, with all its threats that it will do this and that, will actually move away from the JCPOA?
Well, I'm not a politician, but I think it's not in their interest to move away. JCPOA still serves for some purpose, because I think that if they leave the JCPOA, they are going to have a heck of a trouble with Russia. And I think that the support from non-aligned movement will go down. I know it already from this information in 2005, when we briefed the IAEA Board of Governors in more detail in February 2008 about those weapons-related things. There was quite a lot of negative opinions from the non-aligned movement member states when they saw these things happening, and there was enough evidence, so they felt that Iran had not told them the whole story, and they had gone to support them. So I don't think that they can leave. But what they can do under the JCPOA, and we see now this 60-day deadline, which is now a couple of weeks' time, no, a little bit, almost 1 month from now, is that Iran is slowly approaching these caps, which are set 200 plus kilograms of metal weight of uranium hexafluoride, 3.67%, and 130 tons of heavy water, and 5,060 IR1 centrifuges operating. Now they put some additional centrifuges already there, which is against the principle of the agreement between the P5+1 and Iran. And this shows us another thing. Actually, there's a side deal, which is not public. So, you know, for me, as a civil servant of the UN, you know, I follow UN Security Council resolutions, and that's how I define what are my, not only my rights, but my obligations. But then I find that there's another deal which actually gives them some other instructions, and this IR6 centrifuge is such. We have seen half a dozen such side deals which were disclosed in end of 2016 and 17 when the US administration came. So all of a sudden Ms. Mogherini sent 6 IOMs which were distributed to the member states, which were understandings on certain paragraphs of the JCPOA. So I think there are more. Most likely there is something to this section T to do with the weaponization, what is included. The way I read this, I think there may be also side understanding to which detail IAEA quarterly reports should explain the progress. Otherwise, I cannot see why the IAEA took this very low key in reporting things.
A couple of questions. You mentioned Section T. Are you satisfied with Iran's reporting of previous activities?
Well, not really, because 2 ways. First of all, they have not reported, but there may be some ambiguity and something there in the JCPOA which doesn't require them to report. And here I tell the side deal. Really, how this addressing of the possible military dimension, long-term outstanding issues, it was really not defined what is meant with the final report. Is it a full conclusion? No discrepancy? And if there are discrepancy, are there follow-up actions? It was more, I think, agreed what needs to be done, and I think that some of the members thought that, okay, whatever they will do there, we don't worry too much, because now we implement JCPOA, IAEA is monitoring, there's an additional protocol, and we use that vehicle to go to those places where we may have discrepancies or differences in view, including those uranium particles which were found in Farsi. Because normally in the IAEA, if you find uranium particle, you don't get an explanation, you go back and take additional samples. This has not taken place. So it's very odd. So there may be some other understandings which...
Let me ask you about, for years I used to read these IAEA reports when they would come out. And there was one report that I have to say sent shivers down my spine and was perhaps the most important report that I saw. And I just wanted your opinion. Maybe I'm overstressing its importance. In May 2011, you had a report which included the following sentence, that it was about possible military dimensions. It was the latter part of the report. And it talked about the removal of conventional high explosive payload from the warhead of a Shahab-3 missile and replacing it with a spherical nuclear payload. when, I don't know if you wrote that language, but somebody wrote that language.
Yeah, it was after me.
It was after you. When you read that, did that strike you as almost the smoking gun?
Yeah, actually, we knew about it already in 2005. And actually, it's in our reports over there. And this briefing which I gave in 2008 to the IAEA board actually had those drawings.
Didn't you give a report to all of the ambassadors?
Yeah, in Vienna, yeah.
In Vienna?
Yeah. And actually this was very impressive. This was from this documentation which was confiscated by someone in 2005. And there was a presentation where there is the Shahab-3 missile. It was a kind of, I think, 1:2 or 1:4 scale. And this spherical payload was in the middle, flashing with the lights. And the music was chariots of fire. Together with that presentation. And this is probably what they used for some dignitaries or some presentations. But then there were much more technical drawings associated. So it was, no, why it is written in 2011 report is that then somewhere in 2011 or somewhere there, IAEA,
In November.
got an agreement with Iran that they start to tackle these issues again one by one. And they made a kind of work plan, similar what we had in 2007. But in more detail, and work, I would not have agreed actually to that approach, but you know, that the IAEA gives quite a lot of details on each of these experiments, and then Iran then explains them. So this is reflected on that report. And then very soon, actually the process was stopped because Iranians didn't want to answer to that detail, and maybe someone also said that, hey guys, this might be not the right approach to solve this problem. It is.
The reason I'm asking this is because in the West, part of the debate over Iran was whether the Iranian nuclear program was a military program or not. And there was a whole cottage industry of so-called experts who tried to argue that they were running out of fossil fuels and they needed nuclear research in order to give them an alternative to the fossil fuels that were diminishing. And people said that with a straight face. But when you see that IAEA at one point judged that there had been plans to replace the conventional warhead in the Shahab-3 with a spherical nuclear device, I don't know where the civilian program is.
Yeah, and then when you look there are also dimensions on that. You know, they are all to 1 millimeter fit to that place.
Yes.
But I said also that there was a time before 2003 and 2002 when this was revealed. And this is what IAEA has never really been able to write in reports. But actually, decision to go to that end took place somewhere in 1985. There is certain evidence, which I have also got after I left the IAEA, about the decision making and the meeting, who were the participants on that date when they decided to look nuclear weapon development, mainly because they saw what was happening behind the border in Iraq. And then they had quite a few choices. Then around 88, 89 is this famous letter and talk by Rafsanjani, why they need this and how long it will take. And this is a time when institution called Physics Research Center was established in Tehran, which then started to acquire dual-use equipment, which we have published, and IAEA has used that as an access vehicle to Physics Research Center. Then somewhere around 94, 95, a different decision was done, and at that point of time, they saw that the cooperation with Russia and China came to the end. And then they decided to go to the nuclear. And some of this, like this high explosive types, this expert which is mentioned in the archives and also in IAEA reports, came to the country and started to work with the explosives.
Russian expert.
Yeah, the high explosives, the Russian guy. And then you know, they got the good missile, which was then developed to Sahab-3 from North Korea. So there are a lot of these other things which took place. And then you go to somewhere 98, 99, when you start to build these big installations, Natanz, start to think about the Fordo mine, Fordo facility, Kachin mine, and infrastructure. But that is all still to be put to the picture. But we should not spend too much time there. Most important is what is there today. But you cannot just brush it away, because it's important to follow the trace, people, equipment, to understand where they are today and are there activities today still which should not be there. So there's a lot of work, and I hope IAEA is working with that.
You said that what should be done now is that you should ask the Iranians for an invitation for the IAEA to come and verify stuff. What do you think the chances are that they will ever do that and tell you the truth?
Well, there are two parts. Should be asked, and whether we will get the truth. I think we should ask, at least, and put them to respond to this question. That's what we did in summer 2002 with the Natanz and Arak. It took for almost half a year before we got there. But once you get there, you know, you have a better understanding about the sites, and you can do a verification with the modern tools. And it's a bit difficult to conceal everything. Natanz already showed it, Kalai Electric showed it, and some other things. And also I think Partsin, in spite of this very extensive, you know, concealment, decontamination, etc. I think it's a historical mistake of not doing it. Then how you go about it, there you need to think maybe somewhat differently, that how you establish it. But just by simply closing eye and say, okay, we know everything, let's try to find out what is there now. It will be like looking a needle from haystack without any kind of real clue where you want to go. So I think it's important, and it has to be done on technical way and open mind. It's not, you know, expose the Iranian misdoings, just to tell the facts, how they are, and then decide what's the best way to do it. And this is also perhaps the way Iranians can put it behind. And I met them after the presentation of Prime Minister in September in New York at the UN. And we talk about this, that why not to finally close this issue. And their first argument was that actually PMD file was closed. There's no need to go back, period. It was accepted. And I said, you know, it was very interesting, but I also noticed that this time you don't say it's a fabricated information, because until now it was, you know, 2005, 2007, 2008, they were casting doubts about the validity of the information. This time you don't see that. And it goes more on their rights and other things. So I think they should put it behind like the other countries did.
Two questions, if I may. The first one relating to what you just said. The IAEA has the information that the Prime Minister revealed, and I understand the bottom line is that it reveals beyond any reasonable doubt that there was a military dimension to the nuclear program. And the inspectors came to Jerusalem, if I'm not mistaken, or to Tel Aviv, and actually were granted access to these materials as you were as well. And yet we haven't heard anything from the IAEA. What are we missing here? What's happening? If it's so obvious, and if they had access to that material, how come we still don't see any kind of statement, reaction, anything? It's just like Netanyahu didn't make his presentation. Second question, if I may. You were quoted in an interview yesterday with Army Radio that the Iranians are, according to your rudimentary calculations, 6 to 8 months away from a nuclear device. If you can just walk us through quickly how you think, given that they're more or less sticking to the JCPOA, how can they be so close to breakout? Thank you.
Thank you. I start from the latter part. Actually, was missing a couple of important words. Capable to produce fissile material for one nuclear device in 6 to 8 months. It's not the same as manufacturer device, but have enough material for the device. But this happened very often on this, interviews, that those 2-3 words disappear when the journalists put the whole thing together. But how they get there? It's very simple. You don't need to be a rocket scientist at all here. 5,000 centrifuges, which they now have, and if we take the capacity which they would have enough capacity without Stuxnet, really let them operate a normal way. They will produce what is called 1 separative work unit kilogram per year, 1 centrifuge. So 5,000 centrifuges will produce 5,000 SWUs. 5,000 SWU is enough for 1 nuclear weapon. So those 5,000 centrifuges can provide enough fissile material, if they are properly configured, enough for 1 nuclear weapon in 1 year time. If you have 10,000 of those centrifuges, it would be half a year. They have there in the stock 15,000 of them. So by installing those additional centrifuges, the time starts to go down. But the difference between the past and today is that now they have also more powerful centrifuges like IR2M, which is 4 times more powerful than IR1. So when you put 1,000 IR2Ms, it equals 4,000 IR1s. So if they now keep those 5,000 and proceed as President Rouhani has said, gradually increase the pressure. You put 1,000 centrifuges up, it will take about perhaps 1 month, maximum 2 months. And you immediately cut it from 12 months to somewhere to 8 months, 9 months, the breakout time. Then you see what the international community says. You are not happy, you put another 1,000. And this is what they did in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9. Gradual increase. That's one way for them to do. And this then brings it to 6, 8 months, depending which scenario you take. No, enough nuclear material for 1 nuclear device. And to estimate, that's why the journalist left those important words, enough material for nuclear device. In order to answer to the second question is, how long it will take to go from this fissile material to weapon? I think that should start by visiting those archives and see where they are today, how much they still need to work to get there, or are they ready to go? What happened to those facilities there in Parchin, which were actually designed to manufacture nuclear weapon and high explosive components? Are they still there, or are they somewhere else? These are the questions which answer that, how much is from that moment when you have the material there. And all with the understanding that there is no extra material which we don't know anywhere.
How long would you estimate that time based on your understanding of what they have, where they're at, from having enough fissile material to actually being able to put the nuclear warhead on a mission?
That's a hard question. We can speculate. It's a pure speculation because the facts are missing. But it should not take more than a year. You know, they have been working with this couple of decades, and they are talented engineers. They have enormous resources. They went to the best universities in the world. And when you look their technicians, those who work on those facilities, they are very different from those which I have seen working somewhere in the manufacturing industry, producing, let's say, tanks or some gear like that, railway car. They are the best of the best.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Heinonen. Thank you, Olli. Good to see you again. Having been through some of your fantastic briefings in Vienna in my past life, Anthony Hinton, Deputy Ambassador of Canada here. Thanks, Dr. Gold, Ambassador Gold, for hosting us. It's a fantastic opportunity. Just to pull the thread a bit further on a couple of your comments that you touched on mostly in the Q&A session, having covered the documented knowledge of Iran's nuclear scientists, how about your thoughts on the intangible knowledge maybe held by the program managers or the scientists that still are available to work in Iran? As you mentioned, they're some of the best in the world, if not the best in some areas. And then a second element would be, again, you touched on it earlier, the potential for international collaboration, whether it's on an individual's level or maybe state level, with Iran on a potential weaponization. Just curious about your thoughts on those two aspects. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. When you look some of the documentation, I have had not access to all of that. There are a few things which really point that there has been some foreign individuals involved. Actually, I had talked with that guy who was from Russia there, and he explained what he was doing. He certainly didn't say that he was working with the nuclear weapons, but he explained to quite extent, what kind of experiments he was doing, and then our people interviewed him more thoroughly than I ever, because they know more on these things than what I do. And there are a couple of other individuals as well. Then very often comes the question that, was this actually Pakistani design, that they got everything from AQ Khan? And it's when I look it to the extent I know, it looks somewhat different. So it may not be that design. And then there's another aspect to that which is not so well known. But if you go to read the book of Feroz Khan, who is in US, when he writes about the Pakistani nuclear program, the actual nuclear device which was developed and tested by Pakistan is not the one which was in this documentation, which was confiscated from the network. So there may be not so much of that impact, that this came from somewhere else, whatever is there. But I cannot say for sure who are the ones. And then the other question was what to do with the scientists. Well, actually, they continue to work. They seem some to be having the jobs in universities. The important thing is that, how they have maintained the skills. Because one of those IOMs, which was written in 2003, actually was designed in such a way that they try to keep their know-how and do certain things that they don't lose their skills. So it's a little like playing a piano. If you don't play for 10 years, I don't think you want to give a concert. But on the other hand, if you are biking, if you don't bike for 10 years, you jump on the bike, you can still somehow bike. But it will take time before you are secure. So the longer the time goes, and if they are not able to work in very detail with this program, it delays it. And that's why those archives are important. That, what is really there? Is there something which we missed? Because this is 20 or 30%, what is on those 70, 80% if we are unlucky? And then a little bit puzzles me that plutonium part and R&D part, because they are not really part of that cache which I have seen. That what else might be still there, and that's why it's important that the IAEA goes there and starts to go it in a systematic way, as it was perhaps done best in South Africa. I think that's the best model which I could offer, because we did it in a very different way compared to Iraq, because Iraq we had a lot of other rights, or Libya, which was somewhat different.
Thank you very much.